Malta today is one of the most popular tourist destinations in Europe, a playground for the vacationing European middle classes and also the super rich who flock to enjoy its Mediterranean sunshine and friendly people. But behind the picturesque streets, rich history and unique culture lurks the same dark archetypal forces that haunt all the historic landscapes of the world. Networks of occult forces, secret societies and extremely powerful fraternities that have shaped the minds of society as would the ceramic craftsperson would shape a piece of earthenware using clay and fire, the only difference being the level of the craft and technological ability. The end result, however, is always the same: a moulded psyche taken from the fire and hardened into the desired shape until it is broken. The minds of people and the nature of all societies work the same. Those who control the clay and fire of the minds of men will harden it into a useful object for those who wish to use it. From clay into a vessel which holds liquids, from a human into a flesh automaton that holds dogma. Dogma that has but one primary purpose: to hide the occult secrets and dark mysteries that lurk very literally below the surface of this small island nation, a land said to have been founded by a race of prehistoric giants and who mysteriously vanished off the face of the earth long before Neolithic immigrants arrived from Sicily. These giants, according to some sources, went to live below the sun-baked Maltese landscape and into the hellmouth of the Mediterranean. Below the quiet backstreets of Palo, Malta, is one of the strangest places on earth, the Hypogeum of Hal Saf Eleni, a 5,000 to 6,000 year old underground complex carved completely of bedrock, and is an eerie and consciousness altering experience for the visitor once they remove their multilingual headsets and let the true atmosphere of the Hypogeum wash over them. So odd and almost unsettling is its atmosphere that within this subterranean world, Maltese composer Ruben Zahara and his Italian team discovered that sounds within the Hypergium reverberate at 110 Hz, and this creates a strange sensation within the visitor who ventures into this underground mysterious domain. The Hypergium itself was rediscovered in 1902 during preliminary works for new housing which was being constructed at the location. A cistern was being cut out by the workers, who broke accidentally into an underground chamber below. Initially concerned that the discovery would prevent the completion of the houses, the workers told no one until it was eventually made known to museum officials, who could not believe their eyes when they entered into it. Rumours also have it that the workers decided to not hide the discovery when they heard and saw strange sounds and shadows moving in the darkness, and being terrified by them approached a local Catholic priest to inform him of what they may have unleashed. The initial excavations of the Hypogeum were entrusted to a well-regarded Jesuit priest named Father Miguel Magri. Starting in 1903, Father Magri began to unearth one of the largest underground temples in the world, and found within it the bones of almost 8,000 people laid to rest there. As more bones and debris began to be removed, the awesome complexity and design of the Hypogeum became more and more impressive. At first, the museum committee refused to entertain any theories surrounding the prehistoric date of the complex, as many believed it was of Roman origin and could not have been possibly constructed by primitive Neolithic peoples using basic tools and techniques. The artistic design also and the workmanship quality looked anything but the work of primitive cavemen, not to mention its remarkable acoustic and psychological effects that the location had upon the visitors who descended into this subterranean wonder of the ancient world. In 1907, Father McGeary was on the verge of presenting his findings on the Hypogeum to the world when he suddenly and without explanation was removed from the project and sent to work as a regular parish priest in a remote desert community in North Africa, where, tragically, he soon died shortly afterwards of mysterious causes. As far as it is known, there was no autopsy or report into his death. He just simply expired unexpectedly, and along with him his discoveries inside the Hypogeum. Immediately his papers and reports were given to Sir Themistocles Zamet, who was to edit the findings accordingly and eventually opened Hypogeum to outside visitors. A brilliant academic in his own right, he became the supreme overlord of ancient Maltese archaeology, and everything we assume about the Neolithic history of Malta and the Maltese Islands is almost uniquely his own personal vision. Although Sir Zamet is a household name in Malta, he was using a false identity, as his own origins are as vague and contradictory as his findings into ancient Maltese history. Nevertheless, this did not prevent him from retaining a knighthood, along with the Tunisian Order of Glory, a royal honour from the same country where his predecessor, Father Magri, met his mysterious and untimely death. Sir Zamet's main charge during his stewardship of the numerous and spectacular Neolithic archaeological sites of Malta was to encapsulate the many temples as merely historical oddities built by primitive farmers who had arrived from Sicily about 5,000 years ago. Any mention of giants was discarded, and the previous assumption that the Phoenicians had created these structures was also cast aside. This remains the official story of Neolithic Malta to this day. Another aspect of his findings was also to play down the impressive nature and vast engineering complexity of these structures so as not to undermine the elite status of Roman and other later antiquities. Any connection between the endless tales and folk traditions that the ancient temples of Malta were already ancient before the first humans arrived there 5,000 years ago were to remain just that, folklore. Even some mainstream sources have been forced to reconsider the antiquity of the Hypogeum, as the even deeply conservative, in its unquestioned adherence to orthodoxy, Guardian newspaper of Britain cited a report by a Professor Claudia Sagona from Birmingham University, who determined that the original builders of the Maltese Neolithic structures began working on their complex temples as late as 7,000 years ago and then just simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the so-called Fat Lady statues as a reminder of their civilization. These so-called depictions of fat ladies look more akin to that of giants perhaps undergoing their own extinction, as the effects of possible increasing gravitational pull depicted on these statues being shown as severe and disabling effects. Perhaps they were leaving future generations a clue as to what may have led to the extinction of these brilliant artistic and engineering giants. On my own visit to the Hypogeum of Hal Saf Eleni, I was left with the distinct impression that what the visitors presented with, as impressive and complex as this is merely the ornamental entranceway to a much deeper and expansive natural subterranean complex. Indeed, not far from the so-called Holy of Holies, there is what looks like a small dock that could have once been filled with water, and from here people may have once embarked upon a subterranean aquatic voyage into the inner earth. Did the builders of megalithic Malta simply just emigrate into the depths of a complex cave system deep into the Earth's crust? To add further to the mystery of the Hypogeum of Hal Saf-Eleni, the following report was published in the 1940 edition of National Geographic magazine, and which to this day is constantly scrubbed from the Wikipedia page on the Hypergium itself, even though it is a valid source according to Wikipedia's own guidelines. The actual quote from the National Geographic article, written by a Richard Walter in August 1940, stated that
many subterranean passageways, including ancient catacombs, now are a part of the island's fortifications and defense systems. Supplies are kept in many tunnels. Others are bomb shelters. Beneath Valletta, some of underground areas are served as homes for the poor. Prehistoric men built temples and chambers in these vaults. In a pit beside one sacrificial altar lie thousands of human skeletons. Years ago, one could walk from one end of Malta to the other. The government closed the entrance to these tunnels after school children and their teachers became lost in the labyrinth while on study tour and never returned.
The terrifying saga of the lost school party in the depths of the Hypogeum of Hal Saf-Eleni is assumed to be urban legend, but it did indeed take place and is a widely accepted story in Malta as a real event which actually happened before the First World War. The deeper natural tunnels under the Hypogeum have been sealed off ever since the 30 students and their adult guides disappeared. Search parties were never able to locate any trace of the people and children. Stories of terrified search parties returning with tales of strange lights and growling noises deep inside the tunnels have never been officially confirmed, but the rumours of a far deeper network of caves and the lost school party appeared to be completely legitimate. Yet both any telling of these stories and further exploration into the tunnels are curtailed by the official bodies. In fact, the experience of being a visitor into the Hypogeum even today itself is akin to a military base, as dour tour guards watch the tiny numbers of tourists who are allowed inside 20 at a time and are prevented from photographing or even filming anything, and especially wandering off from the main group, which I tried myself and was immediately accosted by one of these very serious and almost militaristic so-called tourist guards. To make the story of the missing school party even more unsettling is that it was asserted that for weeks afterwards the wailing and the screaming of the children was heard underground in different parts of the island, but no one could locate the sources of the cries. The story of the missing children was further compounded by an article written by a Lois Jessup, at the time an employee of the British Embassy in Valletta, the Maltese capital, in which she described how on her first visit to the catacombs she finally convinced the tour guide to allow her to investigate one of the so-called burial chambers near the floor of the last chamber into the third sub-basement, which was supposedly the end of the same Hypergium tour I myself had also noticed a few years ago. Apparently, the tour guide seemed to know something she didn't, but finally consented and told her that she could enter at her own risk. When she entered the caves with some friends, they all claimed to have seen giant humans in the distance, beckoning them to come closer, but they refused and returned to the main entrance of the Hypogeum. The saga and legends surrounding the discovery and official story of the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, today now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is a perfect example of why Malta is far more mysterious and strange than the country appears on the surface. When one starts to look behind the official narrative and discovers an island of remarkable hidden anomalies overseen and presented by powerful secret and not so secret societies, and that the Malta of today is a construct created by these powerful societies and orders who have made the island not only a formidable naval fortification but also a stronghold of secrets and the occult, do not only hide the unexplained mysteries of the past but also to gloss over and trivialize their own particular dark occultism. Torture is but one highly effective method of hiding the truth, and Malta all through its history since the Romans, and with each new invading force, made torture a tool of social control and religious oppression. The Medina Dungeons was Malta's main temple of torture, when the demons of pain and slaughter were venerated and presented with endless sacrificial meat offered to them by both Christian and Muslim alike. Located in St. Publius Square in the medieval city of Medina, and named after St. Publius, the first bishop of Malta who had received the Apostle Paul following his shipwreck on the island, there lies a terrifying repository of past pain and misery beneath the magisterial Vilhena Palace. Within the dungeons below, the screams and blood of Medina's many victims lubricated the power structure of the residents who lived in luxury above their torment. From Roman governors to Arabic sultans, nothing delighted them more than the screams of their enemies being torn asunder and fed to the dogs. Initially a Roman slave prison, the Medina Dungeons is where crucifixion and beheading was taken to an art form, as the dismembered and crucified slaves would be then presented to the natives as a warning, as well as a kind of programming of their minds so as to make them good subjects of Rome, forged in the fires of the kiln of consciousness. This taste for suffering continued into the Byzantine era, where in AD 637 the Holy Roman Emperor's nephew Theodorius was tortured and killed upon the orders of his uncle, the Emperor Heraclius. When later the Arabs arrived, crushing with giant stones kept their own god Allah well fed with sacrificial blood. During the 268 years of administration by the Knights of St. John in Malta, they set up their own Inquisition in 1561, as their own demons of heresy required copious amounts of fresh meat from the dungeons below the Grand Master's banqueting table. The final invaders to utilise the Medina Dungeons were the French, who showed as much dedication to the craft of slow dismemberment and bone-crushing horrors as the previous controllers of the dungeon. The reason why Christian and other powerful religious and secular power structures placed their personal torture dungeons below their castles, be it in the form of oubliettes or murder holes, was to create something of a literal hell on earth, to foster an idea in the minds of the population that their leaders lived in heaven as God's representative on earth, while those who doubted them were cast down into a very real hell of torturous dungeons below. The concept of a place of terror and woe being further rooted in the idea that the deeper one goes below the surface of the earth, the further they are from the mortal gods above. Hell was a place in the minds of the population, hardened into their consciousness by places such as the Medina Dungeons. Temple of Gigantia on the Maltese island of Gozo is of profound antiquity. Far older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, Gigantia is the oldest freestanding structure anywhere in the world. According to all legends, giants built the massive structure. The weathering of the stones gives testament to their ancient origins. As numerous as the ancient temples of Malta are, stories persist of even more which were destroyed and are now below the waters of the Mediterranean. In 1999, Hubert Zietlamar organised a diving expedition off the coast of Silema, bringing back footage of what appeared to be a megalithic temple, to the ridicule and dismay of the tightly knit circle of academics who are the grand masters of all interpretations of Malta's ancient history. Prior to that, a story had appeared in the Monday Times of Malta on February 13, 1994, when a Commander S.A. Skikuluna was quoted as having found the same subaquatic temple. As of today, no serious scientific expedition has been undertaken to confirm these reports of former giants' temples, although it has been confirmed that another vast temple structure once stood adjacent to Valletta's Grand Harbour at the foot of Fort Saint, and which extended over a very large part of the harbour and even far out into the Mediterranean. It remained intact as late as 1536, and by 1606 was purported to have been constructed of cut stone blocks of enormous proportions. For its small size, the island of Malta still has many ancient and not so ancient secrets to reveal to the world. The unique mixtures of cultures and invaders all left their mark on the island's history, none more so than the almost mythical but very real Phoenicians, the seafaring race which left their impressive legacy all over the Mediterranean from their homeland in what is today known as the Lebanon. Apart from their ruins, along with some classical sources, the Phoenicians had remained a mysterious civilization until the discovery in Malta of two ornamental pillars known as the Sippi of Melquart in the village of Mars Axolox on a hill which had been a religious site since the prehistoric age of giants. The Sippi of Melquart pillars were discovered by the ever-obsessively treasure-hunting Knights of St. John, and which contained markings in both ancient Phoenician and Greek from around 500 BC. Venerating Melquart, the Phoenician god of life and death, and a deity who is comparable to the Greek Hercules, the columns were discovered inside a Maltese temple set up by a hybrid Hercules-Melquart cult. Carved into solid white marble and standing at nearly 4 feet high, they contain inscriptions in 3 lines of Greek text, followed by 4 lines of Phoenician text. The Sippi's hidden message, an ode to Melquart, was translated by a French archaeologist in 1758. This became the Rosetta Stone of the Phoenician language, and from this translation into Greek that the mysterious Phoenician culture emerged from the misty veil of antiquity. The rocky landscape of Malta is covered in what are known as Cartwoods, a network of baffling parallel tracks cut across the island's hard limestone surface. Of unknown origin and age, some ruts run off sheer rock faces into the sea, while others rise out of the sea and into the land at shallow shorelines. To date, all theories surrounding their origin, construction and use have fallen short, as the Cartwoods often form complex junctions where two or more of them meet. They are a genuine anomaly, and most certainly not caused by wheel carts moving back and forth to quarries and other such mining operations, as they can appear on the landscape out of nowhere and then vanish again. Their course and direction makes no sense, as in many cases there is more easier terrain for a cart to navigate nearby. Some have speculated that they may be channels for everything from molten metals to water. Again, their location and strange junction points would make this seem unlikely. One of my own speculations regarding the mystery of the Cartwoods is that they may have been filled with water and used to track astronomical objects such as the moon and bright stars across the sky, using their reflection in the waters contained in the channels. Parallel nature of the so-called Cartwoods might indicate seasonal markings forming something of a celestial calendar. The fact is that we simply can't be sure of their purpose behind the construction of these mysterious parallel grooves, and probably never will. Under the blue skies of Malta and its surrounding islands, the demarcation line between the living and the dead is always thin and malleable, as it is between the present and the very ancient past. Often, the Maltese consciousness sees the world below their feet as the literal underworld of the psyche. During work on St. Paul's Missionary College, workers discovered a vast network of deep and ancient catacombs which had been hand-chiseled into stone. Dating from the early Roman period, the bodies of dead families were placed inside and then walled up, creating a temple of the dead. When Christianity arrived in Malta, this custom of creating cities of the dead was continued, and the unique Tabistra catacombs present a hybrid of pagan, Jewish and early Christian ritual burials. Officially discovered in 1891, they consisted of 16 chambers cut into the vertical face of the ridge adjacent to St. Paul's Bay. Decorated with shelves and other ornaments, they are considered only a fraction of what may be a vast network of catacombs still yet to be discovered. Many treasures and other artifacts connected to the deceased which were held inside the catacombs are believed to have been taken by the Knights of St. John, who operated a secretive network of grave robbing behind their pious facade. Dead cults, as we have seen with the 7,000 skeletons found at the Hypogeum Hal Sapalini, are not just exclusive to Malta's ancient past. Destroyed by the Luftwaffe during a bombing raid in the Second World War, the chapel of a famous Knight of St. John, built during the early 1600s, once presented a macabre sight to anyone attending Mass there for the first time. The knight in question, Giorgio Nibia, had a chapel built adjacent to a hospital which catered to pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land. Those who died there had their flesh removed from their bones, and then the bones were assembled into decorations and mosaics on the walls of what soon became known as the Chapel of Bones. Several of the bones were used to create the classic skull and bones motif of the Knights Templar and later the insignia pirate ship which today we know as the Jolly Roger. Despite the damage to the main structure in World War II, it is now well accepted that the Chapel of Bones probably survived the explosion and is merely covered in soil and debris waiting to be rediscovered. Yet even with the chapel being on disused lands, the bone-decorated house of God is still hiding its secrets below the surface. Even today, the densely populated island of Malta is as much an experience as a place. Forged by secret societies on top of ancient mysterious cultures, complemented with a rich folklore tradition that speaks of giants and their unfortunate encounters with humans, the Maltese Islands represent the true meaning of the term occult, in that so much is hidden below the surface and behind the veil of what appears to be. Even the Maltese flag itself, of the 8-pointed white cross on a blood-red background, and is known as the world-famous emblem of the Knights of Malta, today still one of the most powerful and little understood secret societies on earth. One of the many secret societies and Freemasonic orders operating in Malta. Even on this deeply Catholic island today, a strong occult and esoteric subculture has and always will be central to this beautiful land of mysteries in the Mediterranean.